Angiosperms are vascular plants, which, just like gymnosperms, have seeds as part of their reproductive strategy. But unlike gymnosperms, angiosperms use flowers to reproduce. Flowers are pure genius. They are so pretty, we humans pay lots of money for them to be severed from the living plant and presented to our loved ones as a sign of our affection. But that is not where the epic relationship between angiosperms and animals ends. Flowers bring birds and bees and butterflies and bats to their beautiful, sweet-smelling flowers, and in exchange for providing nectar, the animals themselves are going to take some of that pollen either on their feet or their face or their fur to another flower's female bits farther away. Flowers contain the male and female gametes, which are going to be pollen for male and ovules for female. Gametes are going to be the haploid version, meaning that they have half of the chromosomes that a full diploid organism would have. For us humans, I'm speaking to you as a diploid organism with 46 chromosomes, and as a genetic female, my haploid gametes, which contain 23 chromosomes, are going to be expressed as eggs, while a genetic male would express their haploid gametes as sperm. Although an individual human will generally have one or the other, male or female parts, members of kingdom Plantae have a bit more flexibility depending on their species. Gametic cells and their associated male or female parts can be found within either one flower, separated into a male or female flower on the same plant, or separated into a male and female individual plant. The reason each species evolved the way it did depends on the individual journey of that species and what pressures were being exerted to survive and the responses that were available in the novel genetic adaptations. Even though we anthropomorphize in English when discussing organisms and evolution, no organism has willful choice in the genes or adaptations that will be passed on to future generations. So I want to use hibiscus here as an example of a perfect flower to show you a few key parts of the flower. I say perfect flower because it means that it has both male and female reproductive parts in one single flower. Hibiscus is actually an entire genus of flowering plants in the mallow family, Malvaceae, which contains several hundred species that are native to warm temperate, subtropical, and tropical regions. Now, since I live in Southern California, this hibiscus flower that I borrowed from my neighbor's yard this morning is not native. But the hibiscus flower is just so perfect for showing plant morphology, it was just too good to pass up. Now, the entire flower structure is the site and the mechanism of sexual reproduction for angiosperms, and I want to dive just a little bit deeper into those structures. Now, if we flip the flower over and we take a look at this kind of like green, looks like petals or maybe leaves at the bottom before we get to the flower itself, these are going to be called sepals. Now, they're actually not a leaf or a petal. It is just the tissue that covered the flower while it was still like a little tiny bud. Now, these of course are going to be the petals, and their vibrant color is really an adaptation to attract those pollinators. Once we dive inside the flower, we can see both the male portion and the female portion. We call the male portion collectively the stamen and the female organs collectively the carpel. At maturity, each stamen will have a pollen-containing anther on top of its long stalk called a filament. When we take a look at the female carpel, which is going to be centrally located in the flower, it's going to have three parts. The lowermost is going to be the ovary. Above that is the style, and on top of that is the stigma. The stigma is sticky, where the plant will capture all of that pollen to germinate. And once the pollen comes into contact with that sticky stigma, pollination occurs as pollen tubes grow through the style and into the ovary to fertilize the ovules. Think of it as the entire female carpel like a vase, where the bottom of the vase is the ovary containing the ovules, and the neck of the vase is the style, and the wide mouth opening of the vase is going to be the stigma. Once fertilization has occurred, the ovule starts to swell and harden on its journey to become a seed. During this time, the outer bit, the ovary, starts to grow around that future seed and will eventually become the fruit. A fruit is just really any plant flesh that contains a seed, and fruits have a sneaky way of getting into animals because they're so delicious and allowing those seeds to be transported far away from that parent plant with a chance to grow without directly competing for resources with the parent plant. Of course, fruits and the seeds can be carried by the wind, just like in gymnosperms, but it is vastly more efficient in covering more ground if an animal transports that fruit either on or inside their body to a new area with new opportunities for survival. Most plants evolved various strategies to increase the chance of cross-pollination by organisms that are going to attract, like we said, the birds, the bees, the bats, the butterflies. And this cross-pollination is all about getting the pollen from one individual and into another closely related, same species, but different individual. Plants can self-fertilize, but when you self-fertilize, there is no chance of increasing genetic diversity for the next generation. And the entire point of sexual reproduction is to make offspring more fit by having a set of genes that is just a little bit different than their parents and increasing their chances of dealing with an ever-changing environment and therefore surviving. Until next time, thank you for joining me on Exploring Environmental Biology.